In the year 1817, Thomas Jefferson, former President of the United States, author of the Declaration of Independence and one of the most influential men in American history, requested a copy of a simple book. He was not asking for a rare European manuscript. He was not asking for a classified military document or a complex scientific treatise. He simply wanted a rulebook, a pricing guide used by a group of carpenters in Philadelphia. And he was refused. The Carpenters Company of Philadelphia, founded in the year 1724, looked the former President of the United States in the eye and told him no. They told him their rulebook was strictly for members only. Stop and think about that for a second. Thomas Jefferson, the genius architect who designed his own massive estate at Monticello, the man who understood structural engineering better than most professionals of his era, was explicitly banned from accessing a simple manual about woodworking. I spent weeks digging into dark archives trying to understand why this specific document was hidden from one of the most powerful men on Earth. What I uncovered had absolutely nothing to do with cutting wood or laying bricks. The truth is far more terrifying. This rulebook was kept secret because it contained the mathematical formulas and operational codes for an entire economic system, a perfectly balanced system that existed long before the year 1863. A system that allowed entire communities to build massive, enduring structures and thrive without ever needing a single bank, without ever paying a single cent of interest to a wealthy financier, without ever falling into the psychological trap of insurmountable debt. What the Carpenters Company possessed was undeniable physical proof that fairness could be mathematically systematized without a central financial authority dictating the terms. They held the blueprint for true financial independence. And that is exactly why this specific system had to be completely erased from our history books. It had to be violently dismantled, vanished, and permanently silenced by the financial elite who were quietly constructing a brand new reality for the American public. They desperately needed us to forget that a functional alternative ever existed. Because the world we live in today, the endless and exhausting cycle of credit cards, 30-year mortgages, and crushing systemic inflation, is not a natural evolution of human progress. It is not an accident. It is a carefully engineered debt matrix, a masterfully designed historical trap. And the deliberate vanishing of that one simple rulebook in the year 1817 was the very first shadow of the massive, inescapable financial cage they were preparing to drop over every single one of us. Let us travel back in time to the American landscape as it existed before the year 1863. We are constantly manipulated into believing that the past was primitive, that progress is a straight line pointing upward, and that modern financial instruments are the absolute peak of human civilization. But look at the physical evidence left behind. Look at the buildings. The original structures of Independence Hall and Christ Church still stand perfectly intact after nearly 300 years. They do not require constant, desperate renovations just to keep the roofs from caving in. I have an oak chair in my family, built sometime in the decade of 1840, nearly 200 years ago. It sits perfectly level on the floor. There is not a single millimeter of wobble, not a single creak in the wood. And yet, the house you are currently living in, the house you purchased with a suffocating 30-year bank mortgage, probably started showing structural cracks and failing plumbing after just 5 years. This is not simply a decline in craftsmanship or lazy modern labor. This is the direct, undeniable result of a covert economic war. A war where the quality of the physical world was intentionally sacrificed to feed a financial matrix. The secret inside that Philadelphia Carpenters rulebook was a system called unit pricing. Before the banking cartels took over, construction and commerce were controlled by master builders and guilds. Every single stage of building, every nail, every plank, had a standardized, mathematically fair price. Not whatever a predatory market could bear. Not whatever an ignorant client could be manipulated into paying. A completely fair price determined by experienced community members called measurers, who always worked in teams of at least 2 to ensure that absolutely no individual could inflate costs for their own greedy personal gain. The system was designed from the ground up to prevent inflation and eliminate profiteering, and it worked beautifully. But the official historians, the ones funded by the very institutions that erased this system, tell us that early colonial America was impoverished and desperate for centralized currency. They are lying. If you dig deep into the forgotten archives, you will find a highly revealing report published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the year 1928. That government document explicitly states that, throughout the first century of settlement, a massive, highly functional system of barter existed, and very scarce currency was actually little used in the payment of wages. People exchanged work for food, raw materials, and other services. They kept extended, completely interest-free lines of credit open between neighbors for months or even years. Face-to-face arrangements and mutual obligations bound the entire community together into an unbreakable fortress of trust. You did not need a massive corporate bank to act as a middleman in every single human interaction. You did not need a credit score dictated by a faceless algorithm. You had a reputation, a community, and a fair pricing system that ensured everyone thrived. Therefore, this deeply independent, self-sustaining network posed the ultimate existential threat to the parasitic financial elite. If people could build homes, craft perfect furniture, and feed their families without borrowing heavily at high interest rates, how could the emerging banking class ever enslave them? The answer is simple: they could not. And so, the golden age of the guild system, the era of true physical and financial stability, had to be completely and utterly destroyed. The official history books brainwash us into believing a very specific narrative. They tell us that the old guild and barter system was primitive and incredibly chaotic. They point to the thousands of different state banknotes circulating at the time and claim that centralization was absolutely necessary to save society from financial ruin. But the official history is a carefully constructed lie designed to hide the greatest financial crime of the 19th century. The day of reckoning arrived on February 25th, 1863. President Abraham Lincoln signed the National Currency Act into law. Look closely at the records. That monumental legislation, the law that essentially ended true financial freedom in America, passed the Senate by a margin of exactly 2 votes. Just 2 votes. We are taught in schools that this act was created out of pure necessity to bring stability to a fractured nation. But if you read the official purpose stated plainly in the original legislation, and confirmed deep within the Federal Reserve's own historical archives, a dark and terrifying truth emerges. The actual purpose of the national banking system was not to help the common man. Its primary function was to help finance the Civil War by legally forcing the creation of a massive, artificial demand for federal government debt. National banks were strictly required to buy Treasury securities to back their banknotes. The entire system, from the very beginning, was mathematically designed to create desperate buyers for federal debt, replacing real value with paper promises. And here is where the masterfully engineered plot twist reveals itself. A trap so perfect, most people still do not realize they are caught in it. Exactly 9 months before the National Banking Act was passed, the government signed the Homestead Act on May 20th, 1862. The great democratic promise of free land, 160 acres of public land given to any adult citizen. It sounds like an incredible gift, does it not? But historians estimate that actually developing that free land, buying the necessary tools, seed, livestock, and building materials cost between $1,000 and $2,500. The average laborer had absolutely no way to afford that. So, the government gave the American people free land they could never afford to develop. And then, exactly 9 months later, they miraculously created the National Banking Act to build the precise banking system that would enthusiastically lend them the money to do it. It was never a coincidence. It was a perfectly timed, inescapable trap. They gave you the land for free, just so they could force you into a lifetime of debt to keep it. What rose from the ashes of the destroyed guild system tells us a deeply uncomfortable truth about our current reality. The company town became the new master blueprint for human existence. Lowell, Massachusetts, founded in the year 1822, was the terrifying prototype. By the decade of 1880, approximately 2,000 company towns existed across America. In these isolated prisons without walls, workers were no longer paid in real currency or through mutual community credit. They were paid in something called scrip, a worthless paper substitute that could only be spent at the official company stores. The Social Welfare History Project documents exactly what happened next. Without any external competition, the cost of housing and groceries in these company towns became completely exorbitant. Workers built up massive, inescapable debts that they were legally required to pay off before they could ever leave. 75% of all scrip used in America was issued by powerful coal companies in Kentucky, Virginia, and West Virginia. These workers were trapped. They could not leave because they always owed the company more than they earned. The Pullman strike of the year 1894 involved over 150,000 workers across 27 states violently protesting this modern slavery. A national commission formed to investigate the causes actually labeled George Pullman's system un-American. But the devastating damage was already done. The company town model had successfully replaced the independent guild networks that once regulated fair pricing. The deeply connected barter systems that bound communities through mutual obligation were completely erased. The extended interest-free credit between neighbors who knew each other by name was permanently vanished. All of it was replaced by scrip you could only spend at the company store. Now, look closely at your own life. Look inside your own wallet. The plastic credit cards you use to buy groceries, the 30-year mortgage tying you to a piece of land, the student loans you will pay until you die. Are these really tools of financial freedom, or are they just a digitally upgraded version of company scrip? You are currently living inside a global company town, and the massive banking cartels are the company store. But what if I told you there are people who still remember the old ways? People who successfully resisted the brainwashing. Look at the Amish. They still use a contribution-based economy today. When someone in their community has a massive medical bill they cannot cover, they stand up in their weekly church ceremony and tell everyone about it. No one leaves until enough money has been raised to cover the entire expense. It functions flawlessly, exactly like insurance, but entirely within the community, without a greedy external institution extracting massive profits. And here is what should absolutely terrify you. They had to aggressively fight the federal government just to be allowed to do this. The Amish clashed with the government for years over Social Security, which their faith prohibits them from accepting because it is a commercial system. Congress finally had to grant them a special exemption in the year 1965. Think about the sheer insanity of that. To maintain a functional system that worked perfectly without banks for over a century, they had to legally petition Congress for special permission. Today they must file Internal Revenue Service Form 4029, an application for exemption from Social Security and Medicare taxes and waiver of benefits. They still pay all other taxes. They simply refuse to participate in the replacement banking matrix. The fact that they had to fight in federal court proves the old system was deliberately made illegal. The fact that their communities still function perfectly today proves that the old system always worked. There is another terrifying pattern that I simply cannot ignore. Professional genealogists call it the 1,870 brick wall. The 1,870 census was the very first to officially name all Americans, pulling every single person into a centralized federal database. Before that specific year, tracing most family lines becomes exponentially harder, almost impossible. Why? Because the 1,890 census, which would have filled in critical gaps and showed the massive transition, was systematically destroyed. A mysterious fire in the year 1896 damaged special schedules. Then, a much larger, highly suspicious fire in January of the year 1921 at the Commerce Department building destroyed almost everything that remained. Those damaged records sat neglected for exactly 12 years. Then, in the year 1933, the United States Congress officially authorized their permanent destruction. And here is the plot twist that should send shivers down your spine. They ordered the absolute destruction of those historical records exactly one single day before President Herbert Hoover laid the cornerstone for the brand new, completely fireproof National Archives building. The timing is not just suspicious, it is perfectly theatrical. It is a calculated erasure of the past. The exact same decade that violently transformed the American economy into a banking monopoly also completely transformed the American identity. Before the year 1870, you were an integral part of a self-sustaining community, a guild, a local system of mutual obligation. You were a free human being. After the year 1870, you were legally redefined as an individual, documented, numbered, and tracked in a federal census, working for hourly wages, and borrowing from centralized banks just to survive. Your family line is only traceable as far back as the government financial records allow. So, what if the old guild systems were never actually primitive? What if they were the true alternative to financial slavery? The Carpenters Company rulebook back in the year 1817 was not kept secret because it was commercially valuable. It was silenced because it contained absolute mathematical proof that true economic fairness could be systematized. It proved that human communities could regulate themselves. It proved that you never actually needed a parasitic bank sitting between every single transaction. What if the massive modern system of debt was not human evolution, but a hostile replacement? The Homestead Act offered you free land that required borrowed money to develop. The National Banking Act created the exact lenders to trap you. The company towns created a generation of desperate borrowers who could never leave. And the federal census created the permanent documentation to track you forever. Each piece interlocking flawlessly, each piece arriving in the exact same decade. I keep returning to that solid oak chair in my family house, nearly 200 years old, still perfectly level. Made by a free craftsman who was probably paid in provisions, who learned their trade through a 7-year apprenticeship, and who probably never signed a single bank loan application in their entire life. And I keep thinking about all the cheap furniture we buy today, scientifically designed to fall apart in 5 years, built by exhausted workers paid wages they cannot live on, and purchased with plastic credit cards that charge interest rates the old usury laws would have made highly illegal. We call this modern nightmare progress. But that old oak chair still stands, and the haunting questions remain. Why did the buildings made under the ancient guild system last for centuries, while modern structures built with massive bank financing require constant, expensive renovation? Why was that Carpenter rulebook kept so violently secret that even Thomas Jefferson could not read it? Why did the government completely destroy the 1890 census exactly 12 years after the fire, just one single day before laying the foundation for a fireproof archive? And why does every single American family tree hit a massive brick wall in the decade of 1870, the exact same decade the banking matrix consolidated its absolute power? I do not have all the answers, but I have the patterns. And the next time you swipe your credit card to buy something you do not actually own, I want you to ask yourself one terrifying question. Are you actually buying convenience, or are you just paying rent to exist inside a giant company town? You think the banking system is the ultimate trap? Just wait until you discover the secrets buried deep underground beneath the massive post office buildings constructed in the early 20th century. They were not built to deliver mail. They were built to hide the remnants of a civilization that was reset. Hit subscribe and brace yourself for the truth in our next